In today's complex environment, almost every major project, from mining to transmission lines, is contentious. Hi, my name is Ali Mears.
And I'm Bing Giroux.
Welcome to Primary Risk, where each month we speak with the people behind the projects shaping our world.
We'll be hosting candid conversations and hearing from industry leaders, political figures, engineers, and project proponents. We'll be exploring the soft issue risks, challenges, and solutions, and behind-the-scenes stories of what it took to get these complex projects across the finish line. Or not.
Marko Dekovic is a seasoned public affairs professional with extensive experience in both the public and private sectors. As Vice President of Public Affairs at GCT, Global Container Terminals, he oversees government relations, regulatory affairs, communications, Indigenous, and stakeholder engagement, as well as all ESG and decarbonization initiatives. Before joining GCT, Marko held key roles in government, including Senior Regional Advisor to the Minister of International Trade and Foreign Affairs, where he was instrumental in advancing major infrastructure strategies, such as the $1 billion Asia-Pacific Gateway and Corridor Initiative. He also served as Manager of Government Affairs and Strategic Communications at the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, leading transformative public awareness campaigns and stakeholder coordination efforts. Marko is the chair of the BC Marine Terminal Operators Association and an active member in several industry bodies, contributing to the development of Canada's trade and logistics sectors. A graduate of the University of British Columbia with a degree in political science and international relations, he has been recognized as one of Vancouver's top 40 under 40, still under 40, and received King Charles III's Coronation Medal in 2025. We are grateful to have you here today, Marko, on the podcast. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. Definitely, that was a long time ago when it was 40.
I was going to say, it should say a date next to it.
Yeah, we should say the year that happened.
Exactly. Well, listen.
BC.
Yeah, BC.
Antediluvian.
Yeah. Well, listen, thanks so much for coming on today's podcast. We're really happy to welcome you to Primary Risk. We like to always start with having our guests share a bit more about themselves. So could you share with me and with Bing your journey into public affairs in the transportation and port sector?
Sure. The journey in high school, I wanted to be a teacher. And then at university, I wanted to be a lawyer because I saw my lawyer or people going to law school and then graduating, making big money as lawyers. But then, I also, being an immigrant from an immigrant family, I just wanted to start making money earlier and didn't have time to go to law school. So, just kind of dabbled into youth politics and went on from there with the poli-sci degree, and the rest is history. I worked in a number of industries, including early on in federal government, but really sunk my teeth into politics when I got the opportunity, as you mentioned, to work for the Minister of International Trade and Asia-Pacific Gateway and Corridor Initiative and the Olympics at the time. It was Honorable David Emerson. So he had massive portfolio, and I had a great opportunity to work for him and with him, and a great team there. And I sort of fell into it because Olympics being in his portfolio, everybody wanted to work on the Olympics, right? And I looked at this gateway thing that was part of the portfolio and kind of looked at Olympics will come and go, but this ports, gateway, railways, trucks, that's going to stick around. That's, kind of what Vancouver is built on. So I focused more on that part of the portfolio and got to know the people on the waterfront and in the industry and the supply chain sector. And at that time, it was a $1.2 billion initiative that we rolled out. And so by accident, sort of really fell in love with it because I got to learn that, got to know the people and got to learn that this is really the lifeblood of British Columbia. We can debate if it's mining or forestry or real estate, but really, I feel the transportation sector, the supply chain, the infrastructure is, the gateway part of it, links to all those things, an essential piece of all those other industries. So I kind of fell into it, as I mentioned, and fell in love with it, and the rest is kind of history. So from there, I did some consulting work after I left politics, and then got an opportunity to work at the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. One of the key files, actually, when I was in government, was merging the port authorities. There was 3 port authorities locally in Vancouver.
Where were they?
There was the North Fraser Port Authority, which was really only responsible for the north arm of the Fraser River. There was the Fraser River Port Authority, which really is now all the terminals and everything that happens on the Fraser River, like the south, through Surrey and Delta, etc. And then there was the Vancouver Port Authority, which really had the Burrard Inlet, and then also Roberts Bank, that belonged to the Vancouver Port Authority. So the government at that time saw, and Minister Emerson saw the opportunity in order for us to become more competitive as the gateway. One of the first action items, if you will, was to merge those 3 port authorities so you can have more regional planning. Because as you can imagine, it was pretty silly having, a port authority along the river making its own plans and sort of competing against the North Fraser Port Authority and competing against the Vancouver Port Authority instead of looking at it as a region. Maybe some municipalities can learn from this and amalgamate as well. It worked out excellent.
Subtle municipal dig. Okay, it started. No, but it makes no sense. I mean, the Fraser River is big, but it's not that big, right? So it makes sense to pull them together.
Yeah, so that was one of the big files, like I said, and I worked at the Port Authority. And that it was kind of a interesting time as well to be at the Port Authority. This was at the start of the Trans Mountain pipeline debate. I was there also as there was a coal terminal expansion. So there was a big proposal to have a coal terminal on the Fraser River, which was extremely controversial. Still remember the day we had protesters break into the Port Authority office and throw coal at us. They were dressed as Santa Clauses and then threw coals at us. And if you Google it, there's a great picture of Santas throwing coals at
We're going to have
Port
to
Authority.
find that and put it in your intro.
So survived that and learned a lot from that, how important it is to have the community brought along and explain, how essential and integral port and transportation sector is to the region. Because it's easy to oppose something without understanding how it all interlinks. And so that was an interesting time. I was also at Port Authority when there was a first kind of big oil, or it was actually a small oil spill, but it was the Meritassa oil spill. If you recall, there was a grain ship that leaked some oil in the Burrard Inlet, and that just raised the temperature around a TMX expansion at the time. It's funny because out of all the ships that come and go into the port, that vessel, which again, never makes the media, it was a brand new vessel. It was on its maiden voyage. It was a Made in Korea vessel. It was on its maiden voyage, first time coming to the port, and it was moving grain. Of course, people love to call every single ship that they see in Burrard Inlet as a tanker.
But it's not a tanker. People are eating
there are
rice
very
from
few
that.
tankers. Yeah. It was a grain ship on its maiden voyage, and because it was so new, and all the officers on the ship were new, they didn't know necessarily what they were doing. So somebody pushed literally the wrong button, and it evacuated some of the oil storage tanks on board, and that was the.
Well, so they didn't hit anything.
They didn't hit anything. It was a brand new ship.
User error.
It's always the humans, right?
Mm-hmm. AI for sure.
And so it was a very exciting and interesting time at the Port Authority. And of course, there was a lot of focus on expansion, but a lot of opposition. So really what I learned from that, and one of the big things we learned, is trying to connect people in Vancouver more to understanding the port businesses, how our communities are linked to it, and how Vancouver really started here because it is a waterfront port community, right? That's why the railway terminated here in Port Moody, and really our history and growth of the city is intrinsically linked to, let's call it, the gateway industry.
Cole Harbour.
But back to you though. I mean, we call this podcast primary risk because our thesis is that the first risks are often these subjective risks. You can't build anything. You can't get to the objective risks or the technical risks, the engineers and the designers. You can't get to that unless you have permission to build, whether it's from the public or from the government or for Indigenous communities, what have you. So thinking about that, like, what about your skill set that made you valuable? Like, I think a lot of people who don't understand this think that it's all about the technical risk. So, like, your skill set, what did you bring? What's important? What do you bring to your organization that allows projects to move ahead?
Yeah, and today, GCT, it's really learnings from all those experiences, but one of the big things really is how important the communication piece is to any project building. And really, I call it, like, you have to define a problem for people before you present a solution. And I think a lot of projects fail in that, is that they just, people just
looking for a
solution, and they haven't taken the time. Everybody thinks that everybody will understand what problem it's solving, but public doesn't. And it's kind of like politics. And that's why I think people who had political staffer experience tend to, be good at advancing project or integral part of a team that is advancing large infrastructure projects.
How is it like politics?
Because you have to craft a message that resonates with the public, right? And you have to sell it, and you have to ultimately convince people to be champion. You have to convince the public to vote for your project, right? And whether it's a candidate or a project, and I actually sometimes joke around, is like a project is a candidate, right? So you have to take care of them, you have to prepare them.
You have to wade through all the chaff. And
you have to get them
people are even
nominated.
paying attention to
right?
You have to understand where the skeletons are buried.
That's right, right? Environmental permitting is like a nomination process, right? And then building it is like, getting it to the election.
No,
So-
and again, it's this this thesis that if you don't have people-focused people in your team, I don't care how much money you have or how good the project is, you're still going to, particularly in a place like Canada, you're going to run into opposition and you're not going to get it built.
I think you need people who understand how to navigate government and public affairs and community engagement, Indigenous engagement and consultation in order. It's integral part of the team in order so that engineers and technical people could ultimately get to do their job, right? And I think it has to be approached from a holistic perspective, and you can see, even in British Columbia and across Canada, projects that have approached it that way from a people-first perspective, and then the technical perspective tend to be more successful in my experience.
Exactly.
Yeah, we think it's moving a bit. I mean, slowly, but we're starting to see a bit more understanding of that from major projects proponents, where they are putting a bit more money.
Okay, I'm going to put them on the spot. But do you think, you're at GCT,
Yeah.
are you resourced properly for these challenges?
My boss is in Washington. To be honest, GCT, the way I ended up at GCT is, they were endeavoring into building and advancing a number of projects, including some big infrastructure projects, and they realized that was a gap. And so they went, to recruit in, and that's how I ended up at GCT. And so they realized, I think the board and leadership there took the time to understand the gaps in their, we have great engineers who have built many terminals. We used to own terminals in U.S. as well, who've built many terminals, many berth expansions, a lot of experience. But they realized that, in particular in Canada and British Columbia, there was an added skill set that was absolutely essential to the team. So I would say, GCT saw that, and I would say we're pretty well resourced on that front.
So there was no job. So no one held your job previously.
Not exactly. There was kind of like
Sided desk thing,
or slightly different, but no, nobody actually had the exact same job before me. Yes.
Interesting. Well, I do want to get into some of the major project stuff that you're leading. So right now, GCT is trying to advance major projects like Deltaport 4. Can you tell us, during a really competitive and politically sensitive time for trade infrastructure, what would this expansion mean for Canada and for our trade capacity?
Well, so GCT is a container terminal operator of Deltaport, which is Canada's largest sort of flagship container terminal. We want to grow. We actually trace our roots to Vancouver back to 1907. So as Vancouver grew, so did we. And of course, it's natural for us to grow. We're also majority Canadian owned. We're owned by three pension plans: Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, British Columbia Investment Management Corporation, and IFM out of Australia. But majority Canadian pension plans. And pension plans also want a long-term, they're looking at long-term investments. And so for GCT, priorities to have a long-term visibility of growth. And so a natural next incremental step for us is to see how we can continue growing Deltaport. In fact, Deltaport, when it first opened in 1997, was a two-berth facility. And then in the mid-2000s, working with the Port Authority, we said, okay, we want to grow together, and we built a third berth. And of course, now our Deltaport Berth 4 project is just a natural evolution in that.
I'm not sure you know this, but because I live in Delta and Ladner, I was on the community advisory committee for that expansion. I was a community representative.
Berth 3.
DP3?
Yeah,
Were you also a 40 under 40?
No.
Back then, maybe.
I was a 40 under 40 in the 1890s. Yeah.
Okay, so you were on the community advisory committee.
There was a community committee that the port had set up that included, there was a rep from Tsawwassen Nation, reps from the NGOs, reps from some locals who were extremely interested. I sat on the community committee for a couple of years.
So politically at that time, building DP3, what did it look like compared to now in 2025 with trying to build DP4?
I think there was also some opposition. It was a bit different context. I think there was regulation, but I would say there was a little bit less regulation. I think Indigenous consultation was very different approach. I would say it was more of a check the box exercise.
Yeah, I remember they had, it was one representative of Tuasin Nation. I don't think any other nation was represented. And he was just one of many, so he wasn't given sort of additional status.
But it was before my time, let's call it. I mean, I was actually involved with the minister's office at the time, but it wasn't something project we're closely paying attention to. But it's an example where the terminal operator, Port Authority, engaging community, working together, was able to build DP3 expansion successfully. I think somewhere along the way, we've lost the way of that synergy of terminal operator, Port Authority, community working together. And so our project's been a bit stuck in a regulatory quagmire for a while because the Port Authority and us were not necessarily kind of seeing eye to eye on how the growth should occur. But there's been some leadership changes at the Port Authority. I think we're trying to work again toward a way where we can partner together, return back to a traditional model of how port expansions are done, build on that successful history of growth and expansion, and Deltaport that is measured, incremental, but meaningful and clearly cost competitive, because ever since we've been growing, we've been attracting more volumes to our terminals and our port of Vancouver, in particular, from other ports and terminals on the West Coast.
What would
of
the
North America.
expansion, like, what would it mean for Canada?
So Deltaport Berth 4 project, if we are able to advance it forward, and we're cautiously optimistic about the new major projects office, that it can help us kind of through the remainder of the regulatory process. We're about halfway through the impact assessment process. It would provide about 2 million additional TUs of capacity. So 20-foot equivalent TU unit. Just to contextualize, currently our terminal.
Sorry. I
talking about this
actually,
TU.
yeah. So can you explain what to the general
The
population?
TU is, so when you see a container on the back of a truck, like a large container in front of your Canadian Tire or Home
behind in
Depot,
traffic?
if it's 40 feet long, that's 2 TUs, right? So
2 TEUs.
2 TUs, because 1 TU is 1 20-foot equivalent unit. Right, so a 20-foot container, or the small container sometimes you see in the back of a truck, that's 1 TU. 40-foot containers, 2 TU.
And that's how it's measured all over the world.
And that's how it's measured all over the world.
So
And
it's a
that's how you measure
universal
kind of
metric.
capacity, a universal measure. And that's the beauty of a container. Containers really revolutionized supply chains because it created a standard unit that you can.
There's actually a book just about containers.
There is, yeah.
You've probably read it.
I believe it's called 95% of everything. The book's called, because like literally 95% of everything around the world moves in containers. I should know it because I read it a long time ago. So, yeah, it's a great book.
Such a nerdy thing.
I was going
It
to
is a
say,
good thing.
yikes.
But it's standard because it allows intermodalness, right? So you can take a container off a ship and stick it on a truck. You
Right.
can stick it on a train and vice versa.
Marko, we actually know this because we worked for a transloading facility.
There you go.
And I had
It's all
no
about
idea what
transloading.
transloading was, and now I know more than I did.
There you go.
But it is pretty incredible, right? It can go off of a
Absolutely.
rail into a port, and it makes shipping
And there's
way more sense.
again, for those that aren't into it, you transport everything. We think of some things that are shipped bulk, but you also ship those things in containers.
Yeah, people will be surprised. In containers, the exports that Canada has through containers include things like grain, specialty crops, pulses, some dimensional lumber goes into containers. Lots of frozen pork, fish, fruits. From Okanagan will go into temperature, climate controlled containers as well. So a lot of interesting. And of course, import wise, anything you can imagine, it comes in a container through our ports.
Interesting. Well,
So the project itself is adding 2 million TUs of capacity. Our existing terminals is 2.4 million TUs. So total would be about 4.4 million TUs
What's
of
the
capacity.
Canadian capacity?
Canadian capacity right now, you're putting me on a spot, but currently the west coast of Canada right now is kind of in the 4.5 million TUs of capacity. So we'd be adding, 2 more, so it'd be kind of in the 6.5.
30% increase.
Yeah, and then Canadian probably add another, 3 or 4 million TUs if you add Montreal and Halifax and New Brunswick. St. John, New Brunswick. So I should know that number, but let's say it's somewhere in the zone of 8 to 10 tops.
well, politically, I think all of our listeners understand that we are in a time and a place where we need to be exporting more. We are an export economy, and since our southern neighbors aren't being so friendly right now, exporting out of the Port of Vancouver or potentially Montreal and other places is so important. But for your specific project, Marko, what are the key regulatory, political, and stakeholder challenges that you're facing on this one? Can you go into a bit more detail for our listeners on what that looks like right now in the current landscape?
Yeah, I'll go into details, but you touched on exports, and this is very important. And this drives me nuts when I hear it. It's like, oh, we need to build more things so we can export more containers. We should probably be thinking about what we need to build more. If we're going to export more critical minerals, if we're going to export more energy products, we probably need terminals that are suitable for those exports. So critical minerals, you probably need more bulk terminals, right? They're very different than container terminals. For energy exports, you obviously need liquid bulk export terminals like TMX or similar, right? We're not exporting critical minerals in containers, as I mentioned. And then second most important thing is currently, the good news is about 52% of all containers leaving the west coast of Canada, including our terminals, are empty. Our largest export right now is air. So we have plenty of built-in capacity for Canadian exports in the existing infrastructure. We just have to take advantage of it. Now, why do we want to grow? Is because we want to have capacity to incrementally grow. And as the population increases, the imports ultimately drive the container volumes, and that's why we have our project. But we're planning well forward in advance, and that's why I want to go. But from the export capacity piece, Canada is not going to be stranded for exports because, like I said, hottest commodity is air.
Well, we have a lot of mining clients and LNG, nat gas clients, oil clients. So tell us, is there enough capacity for those other commodities?
Not an expert in those, but if you look around, there hasn't been. When was the last time we built a new bulk terminal around? I can't remember one. I know there's been some conversions, and existing terminals are currently, for example, West Shore terminals used to only export coal. Obviously, demand for coal has been shifting globally, so they're converting to potash. So there's some of that happening, but that's all still within the existing footprint. So if you're going to add new commodities or you want to materially grow export capacity, I think that's something we should be looking at. Where are suitable places to place liquid bulk exports, right, for LNG, et cetera. And for bulk, really, it's driven, again, by rail service, right? Like if there's a rail access to anywhere on West Coast, the private sector will invest and build you a terminal, no problem.
The private sector
will build it, right? You don't need the government, but we need rail access. I mean, Canada was built on the railways, right? And if you see today where rail meets tidewater, there's plenty of economic activity. There's plenty of terminals that have popped up, warehousing, transloading facilities, as you said. So private sector will invest, but key driver is rail access. Why is Prince Rupert successful, right? Because it has a dedicated rail line up there. And so, dare to dream one day we'll punch a rail line to Port of Stewart.
Well, this is an important factor because we're talking about the challenge that Canada is facing as an exporting nation and our relationship with the South and diversification, and you're basically saying, listen, we've got lots of capacity in these ports. It's the challenge,
and in fact,
is getting stuff to the ports.
25% of everything we currently move that comes in through our ports is U.S. destined cargo. The Canadian volumes or Canadian demand for containerized goods has been relatively flat over the last 10 years. The way we've been growing is, again, as a gateway port, we've been winning cargo from U.S.
ports.
From U.S. ports, working with our railway partners, right? Because we have such good rail connections to U.S. Midwest, to Chicago, right? For example. And so about 25% of everything that moves through West Coast of Canada through to a variety of terminals, container terminals, actually is U.S. destined cargo.
So the need is the transportation infrastructure.
It's off terminal infrastructure. That is the core need. So if you were to ask me today where the government should play and invest,
if you're king of Canada tomorrow, what would you build?
I would focus back on let's go back to the first principles of Canada. It was built on railways, and let's invest more into it. Let's have the best, most effective, efficient, and far-reaching rail network in the world for our country. It's a vast country. Rail is the lifeblood. And if you look, if you talk to the grain sector, if you talk to anyone, access to rail is key. And you can see wherever rail reaches tidewater, private sector invests tremendously. And we want to commend CN and CP. they are the lifeblood of our country, right? The amount of work they do to move grain, to move coal, to move minerals, to move containers. It's through a massive country, through treacherous territory. It's not easy work, and we should be doing everything we can to make them even better. And that is why we have 25% of U.S. cargo, because our railways are better than the US. Like we can get their cargo to their cities better, quicker, more cost effectively than they can, thanks to our railways. And so, to your question, if we could do something, go back to the first principles of our country, more rail.
So if you're, again, we're talking about we've got to build, build, baby, build. The new Prime Minister Carney shifted direction. That's where they should be. That's where they should be.
Think about where else can we punch a rail line where water, where land meets tidewater. Is it Port of Stewart? I mean, imagine. Last time I heard it was kind of in a $7 billion range to have rail reach there if it's even physically possible. But that's where the engineers come in. But imagine the investment that would occur in a place like that if now you had an option to go Prince Rupert, Vancouver, and you got to understand certain commodities. Like we're not going to have a massive bulk terminal in downtown Vancouver or anywhere in Lower Mainland. There's just land is too expensive. We're constrained. The rail network itself is quite constrained in Lower Mainland. That's why Prince Rupert has been growing, right? Prince Rupert has been growing because there's land. It's more affordable. It's there's rail capacity. So what is the next frontier? What is the next Prince Rupert, right? I was there on the opening day of Prince Rupert Fairview Terminal in 2007 as a result of the Asia Pacific Gateway and Corridor Initiative, right? And that was bold, and people said, no way, you can't make Prince Rupert, go. You should just be focused on Vancouver. And the government focused on there, invest in right places, and also allowed the private sector to invest in right places. And now Prince Rupert is, the port businesses and are thriving in Prince Rupert. So what is the next Prince Rupert, right? It's not building more in Lower Mainland. We should be optimizing, making Lower Mainland more efficient and effective. And we as a country should be planning and optimizing our ports, our federal assets. We should be optimizing, right? Like we should be looking at things. There is no, for example, need to have certain commodities. Like you don't necessarily need to have grain silos in Vancouver. You can have them in Prince Rupert or somewhere else along the coast because they ultimately are exports for Asia. You need to have container terminals in Vancouver because that's where the transloading facilities, that's where the market is, right? Mm-hmm. You're not going to have a container terminal, in Stewart because then you have to put on a truck and drive it for 1,000 kilometers, right? That's not cost effective. But we should be optimizing the assets we have and put certain terminals and certain commodities into places where it makes most sense. So that's another thing, the second day of being king.
It's such a good, day one and day two. It's such a good point though, Marko, because, a lot of people don't really understand, like you said, even myself, okay, there's different types of terminals, there's different types of ports. And we think about the north, that is where most of our major projects are taking place, right? We're very siloed here in Vancouver. We don't actually have a lot of major projects happening directly in our backyards. So on that, politically, do you think there is an appetite to kind of be that mover on some of these new ports? And is that kind of why, you talked about how GCT is looking to build something to expand before the need is there.
Yes.
Do you think that should be replicated in other places? And is that a sellable thing to government right now?
Build it, they will come.
Are you going to them and saying, hey, we want to get ahead of this? Like, is that something that they have an appetite for right now?
Well, it appears so, right? Prime Minister, said build, baby, build. I think the focus of the major infrastructure project office seems that. But I think one key part is, and we have to be careful. In fact, just before coming here, I was reading an article. Somebody published an article reminding, in context of major projects, it had a story about Mirabel, right? The famous airport in Montreal. And that was, when we were going to build, baby, build before. And we should take that as a lesson, right? So we should be building. We should be bold. Government should be playing. But the stress test, the thing for every project should be: is there a private sector partner, right? In fact,
that's where the risk belongs.
That's where the risk belongs. And if private sector is telling the government, "I'm not interested," that should be a red flag. I use the example of and bringing it locally to Project Roberts Bank Terminal 2, right? That the Port Authority has been in for literally 22 years. Well, it has repeatedly gone to the market and sought a private sector partner, and it has not been able to find one. So after 20 years, and still a project that's still on the books, and Port's still, why have we not nowhere in 22 years taken a pause and say, hey, if the private sector is not willing to buy, and we are advancing our own expansion. So this is what private sector actually wants, not that. Why is nobody saying, hey, hold on, we should really maybe stop or relook at this or stress test this? So if we're going to expand in Prince Rupert, or I'm just using Port of Stewart as an example, like the government should always stress test their wonderful ideas by testing, is the private sector interested in co-investing or
in the supporting
participating
infrastructure,
in supporting
fixing the tunnel.
Exactly. That's where the government should play, right? Like if the government wants to play in Delta, well, guess what's more important? If you fix the tunnel, if you replace the tunnel, expand the capacity of the infrastructure approaching the port, very easy for us to invest, as I said, as we're trying to invest in our expansion. But
I have to bring the tunnel into every podcast.
Yes, absolutely. But the tunnel needs to function. The rail access needs to function. The roads need to function, right?
I mean, if we have this mentality, we want to grow the economy, we want to build, we want to employ Canadians, we want to reinvigorate our natural resource sector. Government's role should be the supporting infrastructure, not government shouldn't be in the one actually building a mine or building a pulp mill or, in your case,
exactly. And that's why I would caution. I saw yesterday, I think that Alberta wants to build a pipeline. Why is the private sector wanting to build a pipeline? So, that might be controversial.
I think the Premier, I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt because it sounds like they want to build a plan
to
and
build
and show a private sector proponent there's a
and you
chance.
know what? And this is, and I would support that. That's where the government should play. Like, we designate a corridor that we know the pipelines go. I mean, that goes back to literally what I was doing, 20 years ago, the Asia Pacific Gateway and Corridor Initiative. The government was investing in designating a corridor of railways and roads that facilitate all the way from Winnipeg to Vancouver. The APGCI, our jurisdiction, if you will, in Transport Canada, and the
so you were spending money in
we were spending money from Manitoba,
it was the Asia Pacific,
that was facilitating transportation of goods in Vancouver, right? Mm-hmm. And Saskatchewan, like all that works together.
And pipelines, frankly, are, as we all know, very difficult to build. So I very much support government if that's the direction they want to go, to build a corridor for a pipeline to the effect that they can de-risk it so that it's more interesting for a private sector company to come in and actually invest in something.
That's what we're after here, right? I mean, I think in many of the podcasts we've had is there is a role for government. The role of government is, but the role of government should not be overly regulatory. It should also be enabling. But it's not the role of the government to build the projects, and it's also not the role of the government to create unnecessary barriers to those projects. And by getting involved themselves, sometimes they can create those barriers.
100%.
So I want to get back to GCT a little bit and talk a bit about the project that you're working on. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, in the Lower Mainland, Marko, how do our ports in the Lower Mainland compete with other terminals in places like Asia and Europe and the US right now? What are our strongest advantages, and then what are our vulnerabilities in the west coast of BC?
So our competition is our job is to attract ocean carriers to basically park their vessel at our terminal. That's the competition, right? And so when you have a vessel and you're bringing containers from Asia to North America, you can really go and park your vessel anywhere on West Coast of North America. So everyone from Prince Rupert to Vancouver to Seattle, Tacoma, Portland, LA, Long Beach. And so our job is to attract those vessels to come and park at our terminals. So that's kind of the competitive landscape. How do we attract them? Well, we attract them by, cost is one, but not be at all. It's service, right? And you probably saw port rankings. That's always a fun thing to watch. And we generally, the West Coast of North America ports don't rate very well. And then Vancouver, Prince Rupert, et cetera, rate a little lower. And a lot of that is because sometimes the vessels are stuck at anchor, or how long it takes to, get them to move. Not just container, I'm talking about. And that's linked to that flow of supply chain. It's that off-terminal infrastructure. Because it's all linked to, can the trucks come and drop off and pick up things? Can the railways come and drop off things? Because if they can't and the ship is stuck at berth, that destroys your port rankings. People are losing money. The other piece is labor productivity, right? And, to be frank, our labor productivity is not great. We're just starting with some automation. In fact, GCT operates Canada's only semi-automated facility in Canada, which is our intermodal rail yard at Deltaport. Nobody else is doing what we're doing, but we also did in a way that where we negotiated with ILW, our labor partners, the labor union. Others are trying, I think, but it's essential it is important to increase productivity. I think technology and automation is inevitable, but we have to do it in a way that works for everybody, right? We have to create an environment where rising tide lifts all boats. And so the way we win is by having better productivity, by having better rail service, by being more predictable service offering. Because vessels, container vessels, for example, they go to different ports. It's like a bus service, right? They leave from Asia and hit on ports and then take exports back. And so if you're delayed at one port now, all your other bus stops are going to be delayed. You're now off, creating bunching and lineups at the bus stop, let's call it, and you want to eliminate that. So ocean carriers want to do business with terminals that are they provide a good, timely service, they're predictable, et cetera. So that's how we compete. Now, what are the challenges? Well, we had, I think, 5 different labor disruptions that are supply chain linked in the last 5 years, right? Railways, terminals, et cetera. That is value destructive toward the value proposition that we give to ocean carriers, right? They're like, why are we going to come here? We're not a reliable partner, right? The second piece is, and this is, just a reality, but it's weather, right? We had the fires that caused rail disruptions. We had the floods. We didn't have rail service for 13 days. Right. Those are extremely damaging to reputation of the gateway and for our business. And so, how resilient is our infrastructure? So, where can government play? To your question, is the government can play in building resiliency to that infrastructure, right? Maybe we need more rail access. So if one gets washed out, we have another option, right? That's where the government plays, because that's what ultimately drives our customers to our terminals, because we're resilient, we're predictable, we offer a good service. And cost, of course, plays a role. But like I said, it's not number 1, 2, or 3 probably thing that drives decision making. So rail service is is labor, predictable. Is there resilience? If something happens, if there's snow, weather events, how quickly can they recover? And one of the reasons we invested, our semi-automated facility, we invested $300 million in 2018 to develop this technology, and to have it. And the reason we did that is so we have actually quick recovery, because every year there's snowstorms, there's typhoons, there's always something, and so you want to have surge capacity so you can quickly recover. And our customers know that, and they come back. Right now, there's going to be vessel bunching in probably 2 or 3 weeks, because there's a lot of typhoons out, in Asia and on the water, if you will, and that's going to cause vessel bunching. And they'll go to the terminals where they know they can quickly process the cargo, which means offload off the ship, quickly put it on a rail, and off it goes, so the next ship can come. And that's kind of our value proposition to our customers that come to GCT, come to Deltaport. We have the surge capacity to deal with unpredictable things.
This is an anecdote, because I remember the first time I flew into Singapore, I was flying in and I looked down and there was, I don't know,
it's a whole other scale.
Hundreds of these huge tankers. It almost looked like they were on a highway, like
container
a
ships.
5-lane.
Container
ships
and tankers, but the container ships.
Sorry,
yes.
Coming into port. Where's the best port in the world when you talk about rankings? I mean, what port has this?
Who are you supposed to emulate?
Yeah, I mean, you have to compare apples to apples, right? So I think, and I'm not going to quote it because I don't know what the first kind of top 5 ports are, but I don't think a single one of them is anywhere near North America. So you will see, according to the rankings, those ports are probably places where there's lax or no labor laws,
Right.
lax or no environmental rules. And they also tend to be ports that are not as diverse as ours. So, for example, I remember reading a couple of years ago the port rankings, like the most productive ports, and a lot of them are in Singapore. They'll call it transloading ports, right, or spoke hub ports, where basically a small vessel comes in, you take a container off it, you put it in a yard, and a big vessel comes in and you load those containers on, because it's pulling containers from a bunch of locations. So a bunch of small vessels
Which makes sense for Singapore.
And so you're basically going vessel.
There's nowhere for them to sell that stuff anyway.
Exactly. So it's like basically vessel to yard to vessel, right? So pretty straightforward operation. Right. In Vancouver, we go vessel to truck, vessel to train to yard to vessel, truck to vessel.
Transloading.
Transloading, right? Very complex, right? And so all those, many more variables can go wrong, and that impacts port performance. So, if I would say, in the world, those are probably top-rated ports because they're very simple operation. They're transloading ports, right? Spoken hub type ports. So we have to compare ourselves to other apples, if you will. So we have to look at, I would say, let's look at North America. because it's similar regulatory model, similar labor model. And so I think from our perspective, our terminal, we would be benchmarking ourselves against other terminal operators in North America. Locally, our number one competitor is DP World or Dubai Ports World, right? They operate in Prince Rupert and in Vancouver and Nanaimo and in Fraser Surrey. They're a great global operator, so we should be benchmarking how are we as GCT comparing to their operations in North America. SSA is a big American operator, Ports America, another operator. In Halifax, we have Ports of Singapore. So while they're a Singapore-based port operator, they operate a facility in Canada. So how are we benchmarking to their operation? How do they bring their learnings from Singapore? How they're participating in a Canadian market? And can we benchmark ourselves against that, right? So those are things we'd be looking at. And then again, when we look at the 460 odd ports rankings, that document, people should not, I know there's been some headlines written like, we're like fifth from the bottom. Well, we should actually look where we are compared to North American ports.
It's such a good point, because what really rattles me is when, for example, our electric infrastructure, so our transmission infrastructure, gets compared to European countries. Yeah. It's just not the same. That's not apples to apples. You're talking about a country that's oftentimes the size of Vancouver. Of course they have great transmission infrastructure and can plug in all their cars, right? So I really enjoy that.
This reminds me of when I was at the Port Authority, we had a delegation from, and I can't remember, it was one of the smaller
Sweden,
Northern
Norway.
European countries. And, they were telling us, they were kind of shaming us because we were showing some clips and stuff, and shaming us like, I can't believe your trains are not running on electric locomotives. Shame when you're burning diesel in locomotives. All of our trains run electricity, right? And so we asked, well, how long are your trains, right? And so they said, and I said, well, here's the average size of a Canadian train, right? And they're like faces, just like, so you can't actually pull trains of that size with those locomotives that I have in Europe, right? Like our trains are literally longer than some countries in Europe. They would span a couple of countries. So very, very different.
Across Luxembourg, yeah. So, but I want to take you back to this project, because we're talking about major projects here a lot. I want to take you back to your project. DP4, expansion.
Yeah.
What are the five, let's pick them. What are the five non-technical risks you're facing to get this thing done, and what are you going to do about it?
Non-technical risks. That's a great
maybe
question.
Maybe it's 3, maybe it's 5. Tell me.
Yeah. So, to be honest, number one risk we're facing right now is government. And in a simple ways, because there's a Roberts Bank Terminal 2 project that's been, that's gone through environmental assessment, and it doesn't have a private sector partner. If the government chooses to subsidize that project, it really makes no financial sense for us to continue investing. And so government decision-making, insertion of government into places where it shouldn't be, that is a high risk. That is a very, very high risk. Then let's say we deal with that, then there's the predictability and length of time around regulatory process and permitting. So again, the regulatory process and the more like the timeline of it, because you can plan for it. So that would be it. And then the third piece really is around when we consulted, because Roberts Bank Terminal 2 was already gone through an environmental assessment. It's linked to Indigenous consent, support, and approval, and that is something that's very important to us. Our number one neighbor is Tuasin First Nation and Musqueam, and we deeply care about what they're saying. They told us we don't want 2 projects, right? And so how do we build port expansion that is considerate of that? So, we got to understand that, well, if the RBT2 proceeds, how can we possibly proceed? Because that may be, putting too many environmental stressors in their community. But at the same time, Roberts Bank Terminal 2 doesn't have a private sector partner. So how long do we wait to figure out if they're going to actually proceed or not, or what's it going to be? Because that keeps shifting. And then it may seem insensitive for us to just keep pushing forward, even though the nations that we care about said, we don't want 2 projects. Mm-hmm. And so for us, the key would be, how do us, Port Authority and government, come together and really in a smart way plan what should be happening in consideration of the input and feedback from the nations. And I think there's a pathway there. There's a path there to do it right, which I think is more incremental, measured, with participation from the nations to actually almost master plan Roberts Bank and the future. What do we want the future state to look like, and have those discussions. But right now, everybody seems to be kind of siloed in their own narrow view, and so those are
back to the beginning. This is why Marko has a job, and this is, I guess, our point is all that before you can put a shovel in the ground.
100%.
All that.
I mean, before you could probably even like finish your permitting process.
Well, before you can get an FID. I mean, look at RBT2.
Why would you make? Yeah. Why would
and why would we
your
make an
pension
FID?
fund investors
Yeah.
spend a nickel?
All
on
that needs to happen before an FID can happen, and only then can the engineer show up.
Which is why we always ask the resourcing question. And I'm glad that Bing put you on the spot with that one, because I think it is, as I said, I think it is getting a bit better, but it is a large misunderstanding where companies are investing a lot of money upfront on engineering and technical reviews and hiring a lot of technical people, when in fact that has nothing to do with whether or not their project can proceed.
What's the capex of this project roughly?
About $2 billion.
Yeah.
So our project is about $2 billion. Yeah, and we're tens of millions of dollars already into the environmental assessment process.
Your owners are willing to spend $2 billion to do this.
Investment to build something like that absolutely is, and it's cost escalating.
So that's a
And so don't quote
contribution
me
to the
that it's
Canadian economy, not a draw on government coffers.
Absolutely.
Which is so
That's a
important.
pretty big deal.
And the faster we start building, the cheaper it will be, right? Because
Absolutely.
every day, every month, every year that goes by, costs increase. I mean, Roberts Bank Terminal 2, and we can disagree sort of at approaches there, but they've been in the regulatory process for over a decade, and imagine their cost escalation from their first calculation of how much this thing is going to cost.
Well, we worked at Woodfibre, as you know, and that thing kept expanding and expanding and expanding because they kept delaying. And then every time they delay, they'd have to go back and talk to engineers. The cost would go up. And Bing has said it before, but if they had just built it in 2014, 2015, 2016, around that
my
time.
belief in Canada, because maybe Carney will change it. I don't know. My belief in Canada is get a permit, build it right away. Don't stand around because your costs will go up and somebody will find a new thing for you to have to.
Well, and that's why we're cautiously optimistic about the major project office, right? I think Prime Minister Carney identified a real problem, and I think generally the industry, the sector has been communicating to government for years, and he seems to be wanting to do something about it. So I'm cautiously optimistic, fingers crossed, but it's also not going to be easy. And I do kind of chuckle that we have a major projects office and we passed Bill C5 to go around the legislation that the government already passed, right? So government passing legislation.
Well,
to go around
we saw that provincially. I mean, they've taken certain projects out of the environmental assessment. Isn't that an admission the system is broken? That's,
one would think.
I hate to be a cynic. No, I don't.
I think we can all agree on that one. Well, with that, Marko, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I personally learned a lot. Thanks for sharing your knowledge with our audience.
No problem. Thanks for inviting me. This was great.
Thanks.
See how we got carried away? Just kind
Carried away down the political rabbit holes.
Down the rail line.
Yeah, nice. Please follow us to receive notifications of upcoming episodes wherever you might get your podcasts. Check out the show notes for references of any materials that Marko...
And a picture of the Santa.
And a picture of the Santa Claus throwing the coal.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. New episodes will be released monthly, and we are excited to announce our upcoming speakers, so be sure to follow us on LinkedIn to receive news, updates, and announcements. Until the next episode, thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.